Hey guys, Edre here. Today I'm going to be doing a new album review. This time I am going to be reviewing the new MGK Machine Gun Kelly album, Tickets to My Downfall. Now, as usual, time to start with a bit of background here. Oh, Machine Gun Kelly. Where do you begin with Machine Gun Kelly? From his notorious feud with Eminem, which kind of made him probably the most well-known he had ever been, but also kind of hurt him in many ways. That feud, between his track and then Eminem responding with Kill Shot, which I think is unarguably a better song and a better diss track as well. I've never hated Machine Gun Kelly. I just don't always think he's the smartest when it comes down to who he's picking to have enemies with. But needless to say, he's changing things up on this album quite a bit. And let's just say it's interesting. Tickets to My Downfall definitely goes down a pop-punk path, which is a really big shift in sound. Now, has he messed around with emo rap and those kind of stylistic, trends? Has he had some elements of pop-punk in his music before? Of course, he has. That has been part of his sound for a little while now, but never before has he gone out of his way to literally make pretty much a pop-punk album. And in 2020, the seal of approval for making a pop-punk album requires getting Travis Barker on your album. And that's exactly what happened. Not only has Travis Barker played drums on this album, he also produces it all. And a lot to say there. Well, needless to say, going into this, I was nervous, and I think rightfully so. A lot of these rappers decide out of the blue sometimes that they are going to make a rock album. They're going to make something that's very different. And, well, that's not always bad. Some artists are able to pull it off. You get artists like Kid Cudi with Speeding Bullet, which was not that great of an album. You get artists like Logic, which put out Supermarket, and even Vic Mensa, who put out the 93 Punks, which, in my opinion, were all those three albums that I just mentioned are not great albums. They're actually some of these artists' worst material. So going into this album, I was getting nervous that, yes, this is what I was going to get, another bad album along those lines. And I wasn't necessarily wrong, in all honesty. Let's start off here. Before I even go into the track list, we gotta talk about the production of this thing. It's produced like any other hip-hop album, which I don't understand that logic, because Travis Barker knows the kind of music that MGK is going for here. He's going for a more pop-punk sound, a sound that Travis Barker should be used to. After all, his whole life he's been doing this. And yet, the production of this album is so heavily compressed, it's so big sounding, it's very bombastic, and it just doesn't fit. The bass is so... the drums and the bass and everything is so compressed and flat sounding that everything is just so loud, and, it doesn't work for this style of music. I brought it up in my review of the new Green Day album, Father of All. I mentioned it. This style of production, the heavily compressed production, does not always work for this style of music. And yet, Machine Gun Kelly and Travis Barker went out of their way to produce the album just like that. Now, going into the actual tracks themselves, it opens up with title track, and right off the bat, you just get a very standard emo pop-punk song. Nothing too crazy, nothing to go crying home about. And I will say this, right off the bat, you get this forced emo vocals from Machine Gun Kelly with an oddly clean vocal production. What I find really awkward about when these rappers or more pop artists try to make a more pop-punk album, what tends to happen more often than not is that they don't know how to really use their voice the right way. And they sing it very stereotypical. Like on this song and throughout this album, MGK really uses that whiny emo voice over and over again throughout the entire album, but he still has that really crisp vocal production and a bit of auto-tune in there from when he's usually used to doing rap songs, and it's just those don't blend together always the best. Now you get an artist every now and then that really breaks the barrier and makes an impact, like Lil Peep, which is one of the best artists of the past 10 years. But then you get artists like this who really just are jumping into something they just are not ready for. And everything I just mentioned there, with the title track being standard emo pop punk with a really kind of obnoxious voice, that translates into Kiss Kiss, which is right after. And what makes Kiss Kiss even worse is the fact that it has claps. why do these artists feel the need to have claps throughout their music when they're making a pop punk anthem? You know, Green Day already did this on an entire album on Father of All. Now Machine Gun Kelly's doing it, and I don't know if it's meant to be getting the audience hyped up, the listener all hyped up, because they want it to be anthem, they want it to be a big anthem with like the crowd going crazy, but to me it just comes across really corny, you know. And that bit of emo rap that was on some of his past albums does translate over a bit on Drunk Face, which has a lot of that emo beats type thing going on, that really hip-hop hi-hat rattling throughout, but it has, you know, Travis Barker going a bit insane on the drums. That is something that comes up quite a bit. And with a lot of these songs that go down a more emo rap aesthetic, you know, oftentimes, and this goes with pretty much all the songs on this album, but especially those ones, there's very gimmicky, very cringy vocal patterns that you've come to know from emo music and mainly emo pop punk. It's very gimmicky vocal inflections as well, and it just really really turns you off when you're listening to some of these tracks, especially when they start off with an interesting guitar piece, especially the songs that start off with some finger plucking on a more clean guitar tone. You get a little excited. You're like, okay, this song has potential. I like this guitar work. Let's see where it goes. And then you get MGK in here with some gimmicky vocal patterns and inflections. Those hi-hats tend to come in sometimes, and it just does not fit with his style. You know, the next track after Drunk Face, Bloody Valentine, was the big single I remember hearing from this album. And I even admit, while listening to that the first time as a single, I didn't hate it. And I actually will argue it's probably the best song on this album. However, that's not the best thing, because at the end of the day, it's a very average pop-punk track that I could expect to hear from literally any major pop-punk artist at this point. You know, and in all honesty, things get bad the further you get into this album. I mean, I don't know why, it's just so much of this sounds like just watered down pop punk created by pop and rap stars, mainly pop stars, that that just are disconnected, and no track represents this better than Forget Me Too featuring Halsey. And this is probably the worst track on this album. Halsey's voice and style does not fit at all. I mean, we are talking about an artist who, Halsey has a good voice. I mean, she does have a technically good voice, but it does not fit this type of music, and especially not the way she's using it. I mean, she could have sung more aggressively, but her way of singing aggressively is just like belting out the notes, and I don't know, man. It does not translate well on Forget Me Too, and he doesn't add anything to it. Probably my least favorite song on this project. And, you know, we get this again with another big artist that really is so disconnected from this scene, Trippie Redd hopping in on All I Know, which is a fine track at its core, but Trippie Redd just doesn't fit. And that's kind of the overall theme, Black Bear as well. You know, these features don't make sense. You know, I don't understand why you're making a pop-punk album. You really want to dive into that more pop-punk, gritty, raw sound, and yet you go out of your way to find the most polished artists out there, such as Halsey. And like I said, I have nothing against Halsey. I mean, I reviewed her album earlier this year. I gave it a 5 out of 10. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. But I made it a point that I like what she's trying to do. I just have some issues with the actual songs themselves. And, you know, when she does stuff like this, it really leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Now, there's a lot of homogenized type skate punk songs on here as well that just once again fall short, like World War III, for example. Very short, very punchy, very to the point. I will at least give him that. But just, it sounds like, you know, your standard pop skate punk in a way. And, you know, songs like Concert for Aliens just really just sound like a Blink-182 B-side from 9 or something. And, you know, a lot of these lyrics on this album just sound like AI-generated punk lyrics. Very edgy, very, and what's kind of sad about this is that I have a feeling that these lyrics are actually kind of personal to MGK. But the way they're written feel like an AI-generated song, such as Lonely, as well as the final track, Play This When I'm Gone. At the end of the day, this album just plays into so many pop-punk cliches between the vocals, between the progressions, and it also plays into just stuff that makes no sense. Why have this perfectly polished production when you're trying to be more punk? And why have these artists such as Halsey on here when you're trying to make a more pop punk related album? At the end of the day, I wasn't left, despising every bit I heard, but just a lot of it did not sit well with me. The song Forget Me Too probably is my least favorite because an artist like Halsey, in my opinion, does not belong. Just does not belong on this type of album. And at the end of the day, all of this really does drag this album down a lot, to the point where I have settled on giving this album a light 2 out of 10, which is a pretty negative review. I mean, anything below a 5 is bad, anything above a 5 is good. I was definitely left not enjoying this album. Bloody Valentine may have been the highlight, but you had songs like Forget Me Too and a lot of other ones that just really did not sit well with me at all. I mean, and the reason why it annoys me is because I know that he probably did grow up with this style of music, and I respect his efforts to kind of revisit his youth and make an album down that style. I appreciate that. I definitely do. But the way it was put together, the songs, the production, the vocals, the everything, it fell short of great. It fell short of good. And unfortunately, that is why Tickets to My Downfall unfortunately gets a 2 out of 10. Well, I hope he gets back on track. That's all I could say.